So this is the basis of the work that's been going on. And this is, we've paid for some of this, or at least made a token down payment to help Fred along, because this has consumed practically all of his time in the last year and a half or so. So with that as an introduction, I would like to bring forward Fred Lundgren. Fred, you...
Now, but in order to get into the raw material economic phase of this, I've really got to start by showing you the big lie of net farm income. And Mike Esby was the first one that told us exactly how big a lie it was this spring when he admitted that farm household income was only $5,400 a year. Did y'all know that he finally came out with a press conference and admitted that? Okay. This lower line here represents all the farm business income there is. This upper line represents what it had to have been for farmers to pay themselves a living expense, a wage, an average industrial wage, pay their labor, feed their families. The reason that rural America has been evacuated is because we haven't even paid farmers labor for what they've done. There's the story, there's the truth. And last winter, I started working on that particular chart. And I started calling the folks at ERS, the Economic Research Service, at the Department of Agriculture. And I said, would you guys please stop lying? And the guy who ran the group of folks there, his name's Roger Strickland, he got really upset with me. And he told me that I ought to go back to Texas A&M and learn more about economics. I told him, well, I never attended Texas A&M except to protest their farm policies. I did that on a tractor in 1980. So anyway, I basically told him, I says, look, if you don't tell Mike Esby and some of the people in the cage, as they call it, at the Department of Agriculture, the truth about this, get some memorandums up there, within 3 or 4 months, they're going to be coming down to you, asking you why you haven't told the truth. Well, about 3 months later, that intimidation or threat or whatever sort of trickled their way up, and the guys at A&M, and a lot of you folks in here may have pressured them also. But they finally admitted that this line right here only gives a farmer $5,400 a year to live on. There's why rural America is being evacuated. There it is in a nutshell. Okay, guess what year we got paid? Here it comes. The year we got paid labor, oh God, 1973. It takes 91% of rig parity, which is what we received in 73 and 74, 91% of rig parity to pay our labor. All the other years, we had to go off the farm. The average has been $10.5 billion a year since 1968. That's how much labor we had to take from urban America. That's how many jobs farmers had to steal to feed their families. There's no free lunch, only the method of compensation. Are y'all all with me now? Y'all with me through this? Okay, let's keep going. Now, here's how good farmers have done their jobs. Yes?
Let's raise the picture up some.
Okay, got it. Why we just shifted, did that help?
Yeah.
Can we swirl it around and kind of get it? Okay, there you go. Now, this shows, this is a chart that makes any economist happy, I suppose. This is farm productivity. It's doubled since 1947, since the base period. Here's farm numbers being cut in half. This is what they've asked us to do, and they've taken half of us away that we're doing. Now, all of these numbers that I'll be presenting today come from the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Labor Statistics, or some of the numbers I got from the Economic Report of the President, Bureau of Census. None of these are invented numbers. These are all government numbers, not interpolated, simply taken straight off the tables. They spend billions of dollars collecting the data and millions more hiding it from us. Okay. All right, now I've got to do this, Chuck, and I know you hate to see the numbers up there, but I've got to set this up. This is just
I can't see them, it's just a blur.
Okay, well, if you turn it over, the numbers will be easier. Now, all I'm going to do here, I'm going to have very few charts in here. Okay, yeah, it's hard to get good help these days. Okay. This chart is the basis of how we understand the private enterprise system to work. On the left side of the chart, you have all the income segments of the economy. A lot of this is old hat, you guys and ladies, but just to update, kind of bring us through this stage, I've got to go through this. When you look at this, you know, you got to forget about NAFTA, you got to forget about GATT, you got to forget about international trade, because the entire private enterprise system is held with proprietor's income, rental income of person, corporate profits. That's the entire private enterprise system that creates a profit in America that allows for the diversity of ownership, or private ownership of property. The profits are made in this group right here. And of course, a very fundamental factor is farm income. Interestingly, on this chart, we'll get into this later, but in 1929, farmers were receiving 7.2% of national income, and now they're 0.7% of national income. But anyway, all of the costs associated with the private enterprise system can also be consolidated into wages, salaries, supplements, and net interest. And again, this is straight out of a book called The National Income and Product Accounts of the United States. It's published annually, updated, and it tells the entire story about the private enterprise system and where it's going. Now, let's go to the next one. We'll get off the numbers so you can see the graphs better. Okay, if you recall, all of the profit-creating numbers were on the left side of the chart. Farm proprietors' income, rental incomes. When the economy is at parity, during parity-based periods, which we had 10 to 14, 25 to 29, and 46 to 50, these were all base periods where we had enough money in the economy to consume our production without the necessity for debt expansion. Okay, that's what a base period gives us. During those periods, profits were 1/3 of national income. There was a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 parts cost to 1 part income. That was true in the decade of 1900 to 1910, 1910 through 1920, but the perfect period within that arena was 1910 through 1914. So for that period, which I haven't fully developed the data on yet, I'll show you decade by decade in just a moment. But 1/3 of national income must be the profits of private enterprise, or the system starts to erode with debt. The chart on the upper left is the national income in 1929. The 25 through 29 would be just almost exactly the same. So this is a base period profitable economy. Here is 1949. It looks like the same year. 20 years apart. We had a depression in between. We had a world war. We were rebuilding Europe, getting houses built for the young people coming back from World War II. But it was exactly the same because we had parity raw materials. It certainly parity agriculture this year and this year. Now, look what began to happen. This is the result of subsidizing agriculture and eroding the value of raw materials through the Johnson years, Kennedy years. We started eroding the profits of private enterprise. More cost, less profit. Look at 1989. The end of the decade of the 80s. There's hardly any profit left in the system. That means that the consolidation of ownership is occurring. You have to have profits on the left side of that T chart. You have to have these profits to keep your ownership diversified, to keep the American dream alive. And it's dying, as you can see right here. Now let's go to a decade by decade reflection of that. Chuck, is this better than last time? Okay. He really raised Cain at me for dumping all those numbers up at the Acres Conference, but we weren't ready. I'm still not really ready now, but I'm a lot closer. Okay. Sorry about the color. We just colored it in because that's all we had to work with. But we'll get a color copier and we'll do it better next time. Here's a decade by decade profits of private enterprise versus costs in the private enterprise system. From here down is profits. From here up are the costs. Okay? Quite simple. 1900 to 1909. 1910 to 1919, 1920 to 1929, 1930, so on and so on. Okay, all the way over to the current period. Look at the profitability of the economy in the decade of the 30s and the Great Depression. Look at the profitability of the economy today. It's lower than the decade of the Depression. And it's being hidden from us by debt. This is straight out of the book. All we did was take the numbers and compile them into a bar. Let's go on.
Could you put that back, that interest?
Look.
I never caught that. Well, what was the interest on that? What was your interest in it?
Let's look here. Corporation, labor, business. See this up and
Yeah, I
down?
know, but where's that? Oh, up by there. at the
Yeah,
top.
that's what you pay. That's what you pay to make the trip. You put it on the top. Again, that isn't perfected. Every time I have Jerome do another chart, he raises so much cane. I've got to really be careful how hard I push him. Okay, this one is the one that really floored us. We took the profits of private enterprise and graphed them here. Then we took the costs associated with the private enterprise system and we graphed them here. I know the lady, you're shaking your head, you see what that says. What we did then, we went into the computer and we took the trend line average. This is computerized. We didn't create an arbitrary line like the Grace Commission report did, or in bankruptcy 1995. This is the history of our private enterprise system. This is the history of industrialized America and what's happening to our private enterprise system. And here's about where we are right now. When you straighten this line out, the profits go to absolutely zero within our children's lifetime. That really scares us. That means that our system is condemned to extinction unless this group, the group I was with yesterday, NFO and Farmers Union, some of the other groups, finally get their say. We're losing, folks, and I'm not a doomsayer. This doesn't have to be. This is the result of all the decisions we've made in government since the 20s. And you can't look at that one enough. It's frightening.
Might point out the oil parity.
Yeah, here's an interesting thing. We had a period of oil parity for 3 years. Right around in 1985. You see how the profit started going back up? What appears to be for no apparent reason? That was that little oil bump. That was it right there. And I can show it to you on another chart. But you see how the cost turned around and the profits went back up? That was the oil parity period that was beginning. And we actually created a parity base period for oil, which was for 1983, 84, and 85. And I can get into that later. But we've developed a parity oil price, which is today something around $32.50 a barrel. But there it is. You can see it working. You can see the Great Depression here, where the profits went way, way down. You can see the base period through the 40s, where they leveled out. And you can see the steady deterioration in the current day. That bothered me so much because John Maynard Keynes said that the year 2030 would introduce to us a period of perfection, where all our needs would be met, and all our hopes and dreams would be all around us. But you know what? Karl Marx says that the same system is doomed. And what we sometimes, Jerome and I call this the Marx chart. That's how bad it is. Because it shows that if we don't change, that Karl Marx would be right about the capitalist system. That's the sad part of it. And the irony of it is that you see both of those men, John Maynard Keynes and Karl Marx, diametrically opposed to their philosophy, diametrically opposed to their approach for government and people's rights, both expressed on that one chart. And we're heading straight down the line of a centralized ownership system. And it's happening right in front of us. There's no way to buy property and keep diversification of ownership if there's no profits in small business, in agriculture, if there's no rental incomes from copyrights, from oil royalties, where are the profits going to go? They're all going to be in wages, salaries, and interest. Centralized system, no diversification, no private property rights. We're headed straight in that direction. When y'all want me to get off of this, I'll go to the next one. That is scary.
It even shows the 73 bump in agriculture.
Yeah, you can see every time we try to fix it, you know, it's all right there every time. Every time we try to fix it. You're talking about this little, yeah, it's right there. And again, these are numbers straight out of the Department of Commerce. We didn't invent these, we didn't cook them, we didn't torque them, we just used them. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now, okay, again, I can't do it any other way. I've got to have this chart. Here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is we're giving our country away one export and one import at a time. Let me get around over here. Jerome did this one all on his own and just handed it to me. I said, this is really something. It shows our trade balance region by region. It shows our trade balance with Japan. It's been a negative $448 billion in the last decade. With Europe, it's been a negative $71 billion. With Canada, a negative $112 billion. Australia, New Zealand, a positive 28, believe it or not. The OPEC countries, a negative 134. All other countries, 386, for a grand total loss of $1.123.9 trillion of trade imbalances since the period of 1983, 1992. That's how much we've lost when we've traded. Well, we wanted to find out how much of that they brought back into America, at least loaned it back to us. You know, I guess if you lose money in a poker game and you have to borrow from the winner, that's kind of what this shows. So it turned out that that Japan loaned us back in debt securities $60 billion. But wait a minute, we gave them $448 billion to do it with. They took the rest and went home, or built factories in America with it. Interestingly enough, Europe outtraded us by $71 billion, but they loaned us back $244 billion. They were a bit easier to get along with. And so on and so forth, until we ended up owing these countries that we traded with about $500 billion. So that's the truth about international trade. That's how much exports help you. If we add up all the exports from 84 through 90, say we exported all the crops there were between 1984 and 1990, we'd still be left with about a $388 billion trade deficit after we starved all of us and all of our cattle. We exported everything we grew in America from 84 to 90, we'd still be left with $388 billion trade deficit for that period. But Mike Espy told me yesterday we need to export more.
Did you hand him this piece of paper?
I was sitting in the audience like the quiet little subject I should be.
Well,
Yeah,
mail
I
it
never
to
did
us.
that.
It's really difficult for me to do that.
He didn't see your presentation.
No, he showed up with his guards and his aides, and I've been through a little bit of that because I played like Little League government in Texas, and I know how that plays out. And they all come in and do the song and dance, and then they leave. And I don't want to make light of it because he's inherited a system that's just as impossible for him to deal with as it is for anybody that precedes him or will succeed him. So. But he was told to be for NAFTA, to be for GATT. Not understanding that NAFTA was only designed to perfect the problems in the Maquiladora program, which was designed to pay off big banks that the Mexican government owns. Okay, let's just take a good look at that because that's the truth about the trade
Sir,
deficit.
give me those numbers again.
308, if we exported everything we grew, all the crops, not the livestock, but all the crops, from 84 through 90, just sold it, didn't feed herself. It'd leave us with $388 billion deficit for that period. I've got that as huh? I'd be a lot skinnier, and so would Pally. So would Pally. So that's the farce of exporting away to prosperity. Again, all the numbers were there. We just had to go to the right data source to get them. let's keep moving on.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, I really want people to start, bouncing back here, because this is one of the first outings on
With
this.
all that, you're showing all the deficit. You're not showing, somewhere you need to show all of the income that we lost, not having the price.
Oh,
We'll get to that.
it'll be there.
I'm following.
I'm just trying to get it set up so that, it has a continuity as we go through it. If you look at this,
What if those exports were value added, say were livestock, meats, and so on and so forth, how would that change the picture?
if we did what?
If it was value added products rather than just the basic raw materials that we
Well, wherever you export in the production cycle, you interrupt the trade turn at that point. So it's just how much less turnover the dollars you want, and I'll get into that a little later. But the best way to make your economy work is to start at the beginning of your production cycle and consume it domestically. That's what an economy is about. Anytime you export, you sever that bond between the producer and the consumer, and you upset the balance that normally occurs in a production cycle. And I'll get into that this afternoon. But that goes back to the Charles Ray stuff that we've been updating.
Stated as you create the income when you produce the product,
Yeah.
to buy the product back, the income to buy the product back.
Right. So, no, exporting just severs the bond in the middle of the production cycle. And how much value you want to put on it before it goes. Here's all of those numbers in a simple graph. Last time we had a positive trade balance was in the late 70s, and after that it went straight downhill. And of course, this is the glorious decade we've just survived. Okay, let's go on. Now, here's two of the primary problems we have with the private enterprise system. One of them is the dramatic growth in interest. The other is the dramatic growth in supplements to wages. And I'm the last one here that will ever be an advocate for lower wages. That's not what this is about. This talks about supplements to wages. Primarily, supplements to wages are interest, healthcare cost, pension fund earnings, that sort of thing. So the problem's wrapped up inside these two numbers that go up at a 45-degree angle, almost inversely with the aggregate profits of private enterprise. There they both are, going straight uphill, destroying the private enterprise system. We've got a parity healthcare system that we can't afford to have. It's a wonderful healthcare system. We can't afford it. I don't have health insurance myself. My family doesn't. None of my extended family does. We can't pay for being sick before we get sick. Okay.
And that chart, did that plug into did that particular chart plug in the cost of the services like Section 8, house rent payments?
That came straight out of the NIP, the NIPA book. I got it straight out of NIPA. We didn't do anything. We could go right to those columns where I had the profits on the left and the cost on the right. I took it straight off of there, straight out of the government NIPA publication. I didn't analyze it. I just used their data on face value. If you want me to doctor it, we need to talk about how to doctor it.
I just wondered what was in that cost. I thought what.
Well, I've got it all. During the noon hour, I can sure find it because I've got every description of all of those segments of income broke out as the government defines them in the book, and I can just read them to you when we start this afternoon, because I went straight to their data and straight to their definition.
Okay.
And I'll be happy to read it to you.
Maybe we should hold some of our questions till Fred gets through some of this, and we got a bigger overview because we're slowing him down too much, and I know he has a lot of
You're
stuff to
also
cover.
destroying the continuity. Why don't we hold our
Okay.
questions?
Well,
Generally speaking.
okay. Sometimes I need questions to interrupt me because talking for an hour solid is not natural for me. Driving a tractor for an hour solid is. Okay. This one's frightening. This one's frightening. This shows our domestic wealth versus our government debt. The domestic wealth is defined by our government is all the replacement value of all the tangible assets in America. All the cars, all the clothes, all the hotels, the homes, all the industrial vehicles and farm tractors, machinery, if you added the value of what it would cost to rebuild it today, that would be our domestic wealth. Strangely enough, our government debt is going up much faster than our domestic wealth, as we would probably surmise. To the extent that by about the year 2008, we will eat up the entire asset base of America. It will all become government debt, the entire asset base of America. Now what we did here, again, we didn't cook these numbers. We take our 10-year trend lines and just run them forward. And of course, these will move over time if we can keep doing these charts every year to see if we're extending the period of oblivion or bringing it closer. But all of these charts are based on 10-year trend lines. Okay? So this is right out of the government documents. The computer analyzed it. The computer figured out how to project it forward based upon real data and real history of what's going on. This one's frightening. The government takes all the money and turns it all into debt, all the value into debt before the year 2010. Let's go there. Okay, here's another one. By about the year 2011 or 2012, all of the IRS intake will go to pay securities. Every bit of it. But it will only pay the interest at that time. So that means we'll be taking tax dollars from one group and giving all those tax dollars to another group to pay the interest on the money they've loaned the government, and we don't have a federal budget anymore. Did that one take? There's no federal budget at that time.
Nor can those debtors get their capital back, only interest.
Yeah. Again, this is based upon 10-year trend lines that began in the decade of the 80s. And it hasn't changed in the last year. Okay, let's go to the next one. By the way, Jerome and I named these our Chicken Little charts. Sky's falling, sky's falling. But the sky doesn't have to fall. Okay, this is the domestic wealth viewed in terms of constant dollars. What's happened since the beginning of the Bush administration, which it just so happens to be that, the value of America has deteriorated. Instead of building new plants, new equipment, new jobs for people to engage themselves in, so my children and your children and grandchildren can have a fruitful and productive life, we've actually allowed America's wealth base to deteriorate. Not only did we not keep it consistent for the people that were there, we're ignoring the people that are trying to enter the workforce. We're giving them nothing to do except to go on the public dole. And that scares you. Because it hasn't happened since way back here. This is the base period, 1947. The wealth of our country has gone up in terms of constant dollars until the last 80s. Yes, sir?
What's a constant dollar?
Okay, that means if you look at the world in terms of today's dollar association, say for instance, in current dollars, the dollars of each year, the parity price of corn would have been 63 cents a bushel, 10.14. But if you put it in today's terms, that 63 cents is actually multiplied by 1,347% and comes up close to $10. So if you look at a line, it really straightens it out. It takes the inflation out of the number and puts only the growth in the number. Productivity growth in the number is another missing. Because there's two portions to the value of a commodity. One is the productivity index and the other one's the price index. When the price goes up without the productivity of an industry going up, it's always inflationary. When the productivity goes up and the price does not, it can't be inflationary. So to work those glitches out of it, we use constant dollars. We look at the world as though everything happened this year. Did that do it?
I'll talk to you later.
We looked at the world as though everything happened this year. Okay. Okay, this is the Carl Wilkin formula for return on investment. How much we borrowed out of the capital pool, what was remaining out of that, versus the domestic wealth of that year. So say if there was $800 billion in the capital pool, we borrowed $600 billion, there'd be $200 billion of it left. Domestic wealth was 18 trillion, so 200 billion over 18 trillion would be your net return on investment. That was Wilkins' formula to calculate return on investment. Did I get it right, Chuck? Okay. Now, during the base period, we had about 3 to 4% annual return on investment in America. And of course, needless to say, during the previous decade we've just survived, it went negative. Interestingly, all of these charts reflect that something very dramatic happened about 1980 or 1981 that really hasn't been focused on. I really believe that our country went technically bankrupt between 1980 and 1981, and we weren't there to notice it. But maybe we were, because we were in Dodge City, Kansas, at the NOR meeting. The gold hit $875 an ounce, and I saw it on TV that morning. That was the last time Arnold spoke. Maybe that's about the time it happened, but we didn't know it was happening then. And we had to go through a dramatic increase in debt expansion to keep it alive. That's why the profits of private enterprise are lower now than they were during the Great Depression, and we're swimming in this sea of debt, but we're keeping the economy alive. Something occurred then, which means return on investment went negative, debt to asset ratios went negative, loan to deposit ratios went negative. We had to incur a period of inflation to cover up the reality of what we've done to our country. And there's the sad truth about it. By the way, don't let the 1992 number fool you there. That means that we stopped private borrowing. Debt expansion was going up at the rate of 12 to 15% during most of the 80s. That's private debt expansion. When George Bush took office, all of that started changing. He just started tightening things down. He did it through the Fed. I don't know how it occurred. We haven't analyzed it. But private debt expansion went from 13% of national income down to under 2%. We can't afford to borrow, but we can't afford to stop borrowing, but we did stop borrowing.
We lost our equity, the reason we couldn't borrow.
But we can't afford to lose it, because if we lose it, that's the only thing we've got left. We're not earning, but we refuse to borrow, but we've got to borrow, but we can't borrow. That's where we are right now.
We're substituting federal debt now for private debt.
Yeah, which is even worse, which leads us straight off those other two charts that we showed you earlier. Okay. Okay, don't let this one fool you. This is not anything we'll try to explain here. This is our entire raw material worksheet we worked about 6 or 8 months to put together. I'm just putting it up there in that form so I can brag a little bit. Because that's a lot of work. We've got our agriculture group of raw materials analyzed from 1910 forward. Our industrial minerals group analyzed from 1910 forward. Our energy group from 1910 forward. And then a composite parity for each year. And that's how we had to reconstruct that in order to find out if the trade turn was still alive and well, if the multiplier effect was still in as we wanted, or know that it should be. This was an unbelievable job. Nobody in government wanted to help. When I said, I want to know how much industrial minerals were worth in the year 1910. When you call up the Bureau of Mines and ask that question, they literally laugh. Then I called up the Department of Energy and I said, well, what was oil worth in 1973? And they said, we don't know. We weren't created until 1977. Call the Bureau of Mines. Well, that guy just laughed at me. So anyway, I went to the American Petroleum Institute, and they helped us put the numbers together that they had extracted out of statistical abstracts year by year by year, and it kept up with them. Because the numbers really got blurred when the Bureau of Mines transferred a lot of its numbers authority over the Department of Energy. So all of the agriculture numbers, they're easy. They're not true, but they're easy to get. So what we did with the agriculture numbers, we had to go back and fix the parity system because they'd screwed up parity. There was no relationship between parity, the real parity, and what they've done.
As you might say, they destroyed the true base period. when you
Yeah.
say you had to fix.
What they did, they lowered the base period prices as necessary to keep parity going down. In other words, they decided that between 1910 and 1914, a bushel of corn did not bring 63 cents. No, suddenly it brought 42 cents. So now we're going to extrapolate parity off of an index that starts at 42 rather than 63. It's a pure lie. That's what they did to it.
Is that chart available? I'd like to study that chart.
I'll tell you what, at the end of this presentation this afternoon, we're all going to get a chance.
You'd have to make it better as a handout for your listeners.
See, this is all going to be in the book that we're trying to get published, and all you folks got to help me do this. So, please. Okay, so anyway, that's the composite data. This came from about 25 government or quasi-governmental organizations.
Fred, you might tell them that Carl Wilson used to do all this with the pencil. He never had a computer.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, just programming the computer to try to make it do this stuff automatically is a nightmare. I can't even scroll, and I can't ever make the cursor say a bad word, so I don't know what to do. Jerome does all of this. I'll come to him with this big pile of handwritten notes and all these numbers scribbled on a page, and a line crossed this way, and then lines written across this way with numbers. And I'll say, here, see if you can make a chart out of this and fill everything in around it, and then make the computer know how to do it again or to change it. So he's built these programs.
So he has a computer set up now that can extrapolate these figures into the future.
We've already done it.
And of course, this is what I talked to Arnold Paulson about doing in 1980, because we could never find a computer man.
It wasn't available. When I went to work at the Department of Agriculture in 1983, there was no computer in the Texas Department of Agriculture at that time. The biggest thing they had was an IBM electronic typewriter that would type the body of a letter, and it could figure out like 30 or 40 lines, and then it would forget everything on top of that. I brought the first computer into the Department of Agriculture in 1983. It was a K-Pro 4. And everybody looked at it with, oh, wow, K-Pro 4. Now they're like a Model T4. Bill Gates couldn't have done this, I don't think, 10 years ago without a big staff. It's just so easy now with these new computers, if you simply understand how to get the information out.
You might mention that your recyclables are now included in raw material.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Recyclables. There's an institute, I think, right here in town called the Franklin Institute. They keep up with the recyclables. So we went to them and got the recyclables. And they put out a publication on that. Because the government doesn't want to keep up with recycling. They only want to mandate it. Because the truth is, recycling loses money. So if they really kept up with the data properly, they'd have to admit that it's a horribly negative cash flow item. So anyway, we took, what?
It's in what now? In raw material.
The recyclables, yeah. But see right here, recycles included in the parity. See the recycles number? This is the column for recyclables right here. Excuse me, right here. And that came from the Franklin Institute. Yeah.
Is that data program available?
Say it again.
That data for that computer program available?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
The data.
The program.
For all of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. We make a copy of it. We make 100 copies of it. I want this to get out. The only reason I'm up here doing this, Rossiter died, all the guys have been dying off. And I felt like I could gather this data because I had those years in Little League government. I really learned a lot during those 7 years. I learned how to find data. And that's so important to do something like this. So I'm not going to be exclusionary about this. I want next year for one of you people to be up here doing this. Please. So I'm simply doing this because nobody else did. And I felt like this thing was going to die in a few years because you know, all of us are getting older, and the further we get away from those base numbers, the harder they are to recapture. And I just took it upon myself to do it. And please, I'll get, you know, you will get everything I have freely and openly and gladly.
I hope you've got the program stashed away somewhere other than in your house.
We got 2 sets. One of them stays at one farm and one of them stays at another. Actually, excuse me, 3 sets, because one of them stays in Jerome's car. So it can't die, okay? Because he and I are the only 2 that know where all of them are. Of course, my wife knows where they are. So, you know, they can't be just raided and all taken because nobody can find them to do it. So, yes,
Remember Karen Silkwood, get some more copies.
I understand. You know, if something, look folks, I've got enough done now that if something were to happen to me or Jerome in the morning, the fix is in. We're far enough down the road now to where we've got enough data collected that we're over what you call that hump. Okay, so I'm not at all worried about that. Not at all. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, I wanted to show this just to show you that there is a parity formula for oil. And again, you can't see the numbers, but down at the bottom, at the beginning of 1992, the parity price for oil was $32.38 in constant dollars. That's as if everything happened today. The 1910 price for oil was $7.26 in constant dollars. And today, it's about that low again, about $7. Beginning of 92, it was $12. That's as if everything had happened today. The price of oil has gone from 7 up to as high. Let's look at our high constant dollar figure here. Oh, about $11 a barrel, about as high as they ever got in constant dollars. And now it's back down to about 7. We're absolutely robbing that resource. But basically, in 1983, 1984, 1985, oil found a balance. We were lowering consumption, we were raising domestic production, and we got 70% energy independent in 83, 84, and 85. Nobody noticed, or if anyone did, obviously people in power didn't like it because they passed the tax laws in 1986 which destroyed exploration and just cut the oil values in half overnight. But we had a period of oil parity where our consumption was declining, our production was going up, domestic demand was leveled off and starting to go down. We were fixing our energy issues in the mid-'80s, but it would have been too good. We had to stop that. I hate to be so cynical, but I've been in the numbers so long that you get that way when you see so many of these patterns developing over and over and over and over. But anyway, we now have a parity formula for oil, and it's in the computer. Yeah. That's what I feel like after I get through one of these. It's a tough assignment. How much time have I got left? What time is it? 4:12. Okay. Now, let's go on. Now, y'all saw that raw material chart. I had to break it up like that. That always works. This is the one that really brings it home. Y'all saw that raw material chart, which allowed us to find out what raw material parity was for all the years from 1929 to 1992. And you saw the profits of private enterprise chart, which allowed us to find out how much the total profits were from 1929 to 1992. Well, it occurred to us that Wilkins said that if all the profits and savings are vested in raw materials, those two numbers have to be the same. They got to. So, if all your profits and savings are vested in raw materials, okay, then those two numbers have to be the same, ultimately. Raw material income at parity and all the profits of private enterprise have to be the same if we believe what we say. And so after we had done both of these charts, you know, it occurred to me, or somebody called me. Did anybody call me and tell me to do this? Did you call me and tell me to do that? Yeah. And then I called you and told you I'd done it? And anyway, this blew us away because all the profits that we've earned since 1949 are equal almost to the dollar of raw material income at parity.
That's where all new wealth comes from.
There it is. So, up during the 80s, doesn't matter how much debt expansion we stuck in the economy, it didn't change the factor. It didn't change the relationship. They were actually the same numbers year after year after year after year after year after year after year. Same numbers. On a chart, they're actually the same numbers. I was blown away by that, even more than I was the chart that shows that profits are going to nothing. This one tells the whole story. Not cooked, not manipulated, simply worked off of indexes and actual government statistics. There it is. Our deal's for real.
This is new information for me. Can you explain to me why the numbers are the same and why that's significant?
Because the laws of energy, all new wealth comes from the land.
It's the source of our metabolic and kinetic energy. It's everything we use. It's our work factor. It's all our metabolic energy, animal energy, people energy. It's all the kinetic energy. It's the source of energy that creates the houses,
And you're
creates
saying
the tractors.
And you're saying it's parity with what?
I'm saying who?
And so what's it compared to, or what's it set aside?
When you price your raw materials at a proper parity level, then
You maximize your profits.
you maximize your profits.
You got money left to consume the product.
You have the earned income to consume the products without debt
You
expansion.
consume your own production without the necessity for debt expansion. Why don't we get into some of those other tracking charts? What do we got next? Because I want to lead off of that because I can reprove it. I've done some others since I even talked to you, Chuck. Let's track off of the corporate profits and track off of actual raw material income. Well, that happens during election years. You can see this backlog up here. No, that's not it. Unless you price the energy units that you put in the system properly, in order for them to flow through the system, you're going to have to borrow. There's no free lunch. And that's all that other thing. Well, someone at home loves me.
The only time you put me in the cooker is when you find time to make that.
Believe it or not, when I worked at the Department of Agriculture, there was a constant stream of people coming in and out of the office, and about every other one had one of these funny little pictures or stories, and I collected them, and my walls were papered with them. Some of which I had to have behind the door, but most of them I could put out in front. So you're going to see the ones that are in front of the door. And yes, and of course that's the ultimate bureaucrat there. Okay, so just a minute, you're sidetracking me. I got to get those other charts to show this lady. I wasn't intending to bring these up until this afternoon. Just a minute, let me show I want to show the right one first. Because there's other tracking mechanisms that say the same thing. Okay, there it is. Now here's actual raw material income and corporate profits. Now this tells us that, and you can see many times over time they were just about the same number. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. But about in 1980, we blew it up again with debt. Your actual raw material income is a ceiling past which corporate profits cannot go. There it is. But again, what do? We blew it up in 1980 because something dramatically happened. Our country went bankrupt and we ignored it. We just dumped debt on it. So it destroyed the relationship, but it existed for only 60 or 70 years. Okay, let's go to the next one.
A corollary to that is that Reagan took office in 1982 and said he was going to balance the budget in 4 years. Well, it was impossible. Had he done that, we would have had the bigger depression than we had in 1929.
Oh, yeah. You talk about a horrible, horrible thing. If we try to balance the budget now in today's economy with only 14% of national income as private enterprise profits, we will destroy this country in 30 to 60 days. You will have riots in the streets in white neighborhoods. Okay, now, here's where we've added the debt expansion back into actual raw material income and tracked it against the profits of private enterprise. Because remember I said the debt had to make up for it if you're going to consume the production. That's, that's the basis of what we talk about all the time. And son of a gun, when you add the debt expansion back into the actual raw material income, it tracks just directly with the profits of private enterprise until, boom, it blows up again. We had to blow it up with debt to keep it alive. Okay, let's go on now down to the, where are we at now? Okay, now some more of the causative factors. This is an old one, we've all seen that, but we've got it computerized right now. As farm income went down as a percentage of national income, interest went up inversely because we didn't properly price 2/3 of the raw materials that we brought into existence. Let's go ahead and bring this one up. I'm going to show you some projections because we've got a few more minutes. I'm going to get into the trade turn, the multiplier, and a lot of the stuff that shows the redevelopment of the relationship between raw material income and national income this afternoon. But I want to just give you one of these now just to show you where we are and where we're going. Normally, the ratio between gross savings and national income is 1 part gross savings to 5 parts national income. This has been true for about 50 years. And that's that same 1 to 5 that we've been stuck on since last base period. We haven't changed it because we've been putting in debt and our actual trade turn has not moved up. But something really bad is happening right now to that savings to national income ratio. Debt is not keeping it consistent. And under the current past 10-year trends, that ratio is going to go up from, say, taking 7 or 8 years to pay off our debt to the point that by the year 2010, there'll be so little savings in the country, it's going to take an entire lifetime to pay off the country's debt. So that means the new people that enter the workforce in the year 2010 won't be able to contribute anything to domestic wealth. It'll only be to service debt. Their entire lives will be spent in debt with no chance of improvement. And this is the current trend line. This is at the ages. This will get you up to 80 right here. 80 years of debt in the economy. But all through the past, we've had about 8 or 9 years of total debt in the economy. So that savings rate is going to nothing. And because of that, we're all going to be living in a system that has no profits before long. I'm ready for lunch. What time is it? Why don't I open this up for questions? Because Chuck, this afternoon it breaks into a different type of...
All right, why don't we finish up here with a few little questions, and then we'll break for lunch, and then we'll take the second section of this later on. Go ahead. Let's take a few questions. Ray.
The question is a statement of fact that, as I told you 2 years ago, the time when the ball game was over is when the federal government could not borrow in the Treasury bill market on Monday morning. And of course, when the savings are gone, and when the foreigners don't think that we have anything left to mortgage, they're not going to buy our bonds. And as Fred pointed out those charts there, 2010 is about the max.
We can't get past that under any scenario.
Under the extrapolation, because a lot of people have always come to these norm meetings wanting to know time frames. And so Fred has given you the answers to those time frames this morning, which you can get no place. No one else ever had them. I never had the answers to them. I wanted this work done 15 years ago for the extrapolation of these trend lines, and now we have it. And so you're on the cutting edge of original research right here that extrapolates what Carl Wilson started in 1937 and was brought up to in this book as far as it was at that time.
Okay. Lady over there.
You've been standing up the whole time.
Okay.
In fact,
I can't keep up with all these charts. Where can I?
I can't hardly either.
Where can I get
Honestly, now, this is really hard for me to do, so don't. What we may want to do, okay, the trouble of this, I can make them better than this. If we mailed all this out in a couple of 3 months, it would be so much easier to read, so much easier to consume. If I could just have 2 or 3 more months to work them up, because the little X, the boxes around the lines and then the circles, they look too much the same. And I need to do a lot of work on them to make them nicer, jazz them up.
Fred, I just want to interject something here. All these statistics are worthless. If you think you're going to take these statistics out there and convince people with statistics. One of my themes that I've always said in the Norm conference is, we deal with concepts. The concept is that you have to create earned income to buy the production back to create the necessary parent. And all these numbers do is prove that. But don't think that you're going to take the numbers and win the battle, because you have to deal with concepts. The concepts are the important thing. The concepts are in Charles Walter's books over there. And all we're doing now is taking these numbers that Carl Wilton used to develop the concepts and proving that our concepts are right. We took these numbers to the Stuart Eisenstat, Charles did, and Mr. Roster in 1978, and showed them where the country was going in 1978. Stuart Eisenstat was the economic advisor to President Carter. And we showed them all these numbers. And they pigeonholed Vince over in the corner and says, don't tell us that agriculture is important because it's less than 1.5% of gross national product. So you can use numbers to show anything, but if you lose sight of the concept, you're lost.
Okay. With that, we're going to close up this session right now. Just remember, like old Sock says, it's all in the logic. Now, if you think that making money out of thin air, as opposed to monetizing the kinetic and metabolic energy.
Pointer. Anybody? Oh, I know what it is. Put it in the book. Just a minute. I gotta get my pointer. What I've done, and I'm on. No, I'm not on. I'm not on.
Mike.
Says power.
Oh, look there.
Now I'm on.
You're on.
Okay, what I thought I'd do is, sounding too loud, oh, I guess I had 2 mics. What I thought I'd do is to go through, is it echoing too much? I'm going to go through some more charts. A few of them are pretty simple, but this thing's going to get real deep real quick. What I'd like to do this afternoon is to get into the Charles Ray issue of the moving mathematical constant, and how the rollover of dollars changes gradually and systematically over time, and how the distance mathematically between the raw material producer and the consumer grows as your economy expands and technology improves. It gets really, really deep. I wish I had Jerome here to help me, because some of the formula that were based upon Charles Ray's work are only in Jerome's head and Jerome's computer. I told him how to input them, and then he perfected them through trial and error until they got to be hopefully consistent with the original discipline. So I'm going to show you some of the Charles Ray charts that we perfected, including projections of national income well into the 21st century that possibly will need a greater bit of explanation that I can provide even with what I've got in the book. I'm going to read you some passages directly out of the book that relate to a lot of the more complicated aspects of this thing. But right now, we'll start out with something a little simple. This is another one of those Chicken Little charts. And this simply shows that the profits of private enterprise, which rocked along pretty good up there, over 30%, are now going down, 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 and we find it right here. The net interest portion of the national economy we find right there. If you take these two lines and trend them out, you can see that before long, the net interest will be greater than all the profits of private enterprise. That is unconscionable. Let's go on to the next one. No, we've seen that one already. Let's go off of this stack right here. I've ordered this stack up. Okay, what I did here was to put workers' wages in terms of constant dollars, basically identifying the purchasing power of wage earners, their average purchasing power over time. In 1959, the average worker wage was about $13,500. In 1973, it peaked out at about $16,500 because we were generating enough income for us to purchase our production. Standard of living was increasing. It's continued to deteriorate since that one moment of attempt at equilibrium, and it's now back to $13,200, which is less than the 1959 level standard of living. That's the true story of our standards of living in America today. Y'all want to stick on the wall and just keep rolling? Okay, let's go on. Now, that's one of the problems that's happening. Another problem that's happening is what we've done to oil. And I'm going to go through oil and agriculture and labor, all three of you, real quickly. Parity price for oil in 1992 was $32. We paid $16, left half of the new money on the table. Right now, it's worse than that. Parity price may be up closer to 34. I haven't figured it in the past few months. The actual price, somewhere, we sold the load of oil last month and received less than net $10 a barrel on 180 barrels. That's South Texas Light Sweet, which is just below the grade of a West Texas Intermediate crude. So we're actually leaving 2/3 of the new money on the table, refusing to earn 2/3 of the money that's available to us from the oil field. Y'all with me? Okay, let's keep going.
Can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
How much is the oil low now compared to years ago is being produced in the United States?
We're down below 50% right now if you really netted it out.
In other words, the rest is imported.
Yeah, so we're destroying our ability to earn royalties, which lowers rental incomes on the profits of private enterprise. Part of that rental income should be royalties and copyrights and those sorts of things. Part of those royalties are oil and gas royalties we're not earning. We're refusing to earn about half of the royalties we should because we're importing the oil and giving the royalties to other people in other countries, as well as the working interest, as well as the oil itself, the whole production. Okay, golly. Here's wages and salaries. This is real interesting. I told you that supplements to wages were a real big problem right now. They're going up because of the interest inside and the parity health care system that we can't afford. Here's wages and salaries and supplements as a percentage of national income. In 1946 to 1950, they averaged about 65–66% of national income, wages, salaries, and supplements. Okay? Now they're up above 75%. But now let's look closer. Let's look what we do when we take supplements out of the system. When we take wage supplements out, which is the cost of health care, the interest internally in pension plans, and whatnot, we find that wages and salaries have been a consistent 61–62% of national income for 50 years. So that tells you a whole lot about what's going on. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this, I was told to put this one up here because Vince used to use this, and it's something that we really need to look at. I'm taking a look here at the public and private debt as a percentage of national income. Okay, it's always over 100 because we have to have some debt even if we think things are going well. We think we do. Excuse me, we think we do. Between the period of 1910 to 1914, It was averaged about 185%. Less than 2 years, national income would pay all the debt there was. Okay? And between 1925 and 29, it was right around 200 again. You can see it right there. 1946 to 1950, there it is again, around 200. But look in between. In 1933, we were up almost at 400%. Took 4 years of income to pay off the debt. Okay? And watch what's happened. Down at the end, we're up. 1993, it's higher than that. We're up close to about 300 again. 296% is very close to the level of 1931 at 283. So our debt ratio to national income is going right into that depression era. But of course, we're covering it up with debt, and we refuse to acknowledge it really exists. But when you dissect the numbers like that, you can see where we're headed. Okay. This is public and private debt expansion. This is current dollars, the dollars of the day, the dollars of that period. This shows the private debt expansion we had during the past decade. It just exploded right through that era, completely exploded. This is what I was talking about this morning, about 13 to 15% of the national. We expanded debt at a rate of about 13 to 15% of national income through that era. And of course, now we just decided to quit abruptly. Remember I said we got to keep borrowing, but we can't afford to borrow what we borrow, but we better not quit borrowing, but we have. The ultimate economic paradox is staring at us. Okay. Okay, this one, let's go on. Let's not do that one right now. This is the labor term. I'm not ready to run into it yet. Okay. Now I want to get into the ratios a little bit. Like I say, this is going to be jumping into the deep end of the pool. This talks about raw material income and parity. All the ratios that when combined with debt equal 1 to 5. Let's go through the years. 1946 to 1950, the capital pool as a percentage of national income is a 1 to 5 ratio. Gross savings as a percentage of national income, 1 to 5 ratio. Raw material to debt expansion started growing over time when you combined it, debt expansion with the actual raw material income until it actually took over the old ratio of the base period. So we're taking debt and we're replacing debt where we had raw material income, we're putting debt back in until we've created a new multiplier that's combining debt and raw materials. We've created a brand new multiplier, which is a 1 to 5. It's combined debt and raw materials. And there it is right here, 5.08. Just like Wilkins said it should be without debt. Okay? Here's the money left over after we do our out-of-pocket cost. Here's the money left over. Actually, we spend 80% of our national income on consumer out-of-pocket expenditures. That other 20%, which is that 1 to 5, should be our profit. Well, let's see if it is. This 20% of national income left afterwards, 4.92, 4.42. Look what happened here. We've got to spend 87% of our national income now on out-of-pocket costs, leaving only 12% for extended time purchases like homes and cars and those sorts of things. Shows a lower savings rate, shows a deteriorating savings rate. Now, that's not a good explanation. It takes about 10 hours to do that right. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to jump in the book, and I'm just going to start reading through some of these passages that I've edited and re-edited probably 30 times. And it's probably going to take me 10 or 15 minutes to do. But if I go through some of these main points about Charles Ray's moving mathematical constant and how it changes over time, how it should change over time but hasn't, this shows it hasn't changed over time. There should be a big question in everybody's mind. Why are these ratios staying the same? They're staying the same because we're not adding raw material income to create the extra multiplier. We're putting debt in. Debt stalls the economy. We're at the same ratios we were during the last base period of 46-50. Do you see what we've got here? We've got an economy stalled in debt. And we won't allow it to increase and multiply with raw materials. There it all is, just like Carl Wilkin left it for us at the last base period. It stayed the same. We simply added debt on top of it. Are y'all with me on this one?
So you might say the debt at that time frame was 500 billion. And now it's, that's the federal debt.
Yeah.
And now the federal debt is 4.4 trillion.
Yeah. But of course the private debt does the same thing. If you're a consumer and you borrow to consume, you leave debt in the cycle. You expand debt. If you have to borrow to consume, you increase debt. And that shows that's all we've done. We've just left the trade turn low and we've increased debt. That's not a good explanation. Again, like I say, this jumps into the deep end of the pool. I'm just going to start reading through some of this stuff and let's see if we can all learn together. Okay, to do that, let's put up what I call the utopian T-chart. Let's go on down and get into where I project the corrected national income all the way forward to the year 2010. No, the belonging thing. No. Y'all ain't gonna go down. We'll have the year 2010. This one right here. Okay, here's the chart. Well, it's not happening. There's the chart. That's the derivative of that complicated computerized program that we developed to project forward a repaired national income. And to do this, golly, to do this, I'm going to have to show you a different chart. Okay, let me just bring it back up one more time, and I'm going to make a point here. If you'll notice, the farm portion of national income in 1947 to 1949 was 7%. Y'all remember that from the base period. Okay, we've deteriorated it to the point now that it's less than 1%. So in order to restore the thing, what we had to do, we had to go back to the base period, factor in the suggested changes in technology, the suggested improvements, the way the economy should have been, and then we moved it forward. And what we ended up with, at a par economy, by the year 2010, it didn't take till if we started fixing it now, by the year 2010, we could restore a par economy. And at that point, agriculture would be receiving 4.6% of national income, but by receiving 4.6%, would still have the same economic benefits that it gave the economy during the base period at 7%. The rest of the people were engaged in higher tech jobs, manufacturing, not services, but building things for us that we want and think we need. A lot of times assisting us to produce better and more efficiently. Now, let's take it off. Well, I blew that. Okay, Wilkin always said that production times price equals income. That was the mainstay of raw material economics. We found that the industrial production index was what he was using for our productivity. That industrial production index is produced by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And I've lost my pointer again, and I feel incomplete. It was real difficult to restore this chart because Wilkin didn't tell anybody what indexes he was using. There's a half a dozen of these indexes out there that chart productivity in different shapes and forms and fashions. And we had to do numerous charts until we found the right one, the right indexes to match. Wilkin said production times price equals income. The productivity index times the consumer price index, okay? which is put out by the Department of Labor, equals the base period national income. That's the fundamental thought process behind creating a base period. If during the base period the economy was structurally balanced and we could consume our own production without expanding debt, then it was suitable as a base period. And of course, to have that base period, agriculture and other raw materials had to generate the foundation of the economy. Or else you had to expand debt, and it wasn't suitable for a base period. It either is or it isn't. Okay, that period was. The arithmetic works out. So, we asked the Board of Governors to send us the Industrial Productivity Index and to revise it to base on 147.49, which is simply manipulating the numbers. It doesn't change the outcome. And we asked the Labor Department to send us an index base 100 for 47.49 and run that forward. Now, when you do that, you can create a hypothetical national income that should have been. Are you with me? Okay. The national income that should have been in 1992 was 5.9 trillion. The national income that really was 4.7. Now, what if you add up all that loss of income over time? What if you add up the money we refused to earn? We should have earned it. All we would have had to do was stay on the standard, maintain policies that would have kept prosperity, but we refused to do that. So let's add up the problem. Well, we did that. When we added up the cumulative loss of national income, over that time, it accumulated $13.3 trillion in income we just refused to earn because we just somehow didn't want to. During that same period, though, we decided to replace that income with debt, which is the difference between the actual national income and the parity national income. That amount totaled $12.2 trillion. That was the debt expansion that we used to keep the economy flowing. Okay, it's coming home right now. Had we stayed on the standard, we'd have had no debt expansion since the last base period, and we'd have had $1 trillion money in the Treasury. Parity still works. Are y'all with me? Did anybody not get there? Because this is very fundamental. Y'all got there with me. Okay, that shows that parity is applicable to our economy today, and shows that all the public and private debt since the last base period has been an arbitrary tax on our ability to produce. And it proves that we're on the right track, folks. It proves that this organization has the answer. Yeah.
Fred, would that be, if you took the raw material income that we shorted ourselves, times the trade turn, will that come out with the same number? As I recall, that's what...
the raw material income that we shorted ourselves.
During that...
The underpayment to raw materials.
Right. The underpayment
times
the trade turn.
It's got to. It's got to.
Because as I read The Unforgiven the first time, as I recall, that was the one statistic that finally threw me into the believer column.
Oh, really?
Was that the shortage of raw material income times the trade turn equaled the growth of debt.
Okay, this is one way I did it. I did it another way. Last September, I was at the AAM delegates meeting in D.C. And I was staying with B.B. Morris at the time. So I named this one the Morris charts. B.B. came in the room that night and he says, Fred, he says, why don't you add up all the underpayments to raw materials times the interest, that extra interest that cost us, and see if that's enough to pay off the public and private debt. And he tells me this at 11 o'clock at night. Tells me this at 11 o'clock at night after I've spent all day worrying with this stuff. And I wanted to rest so bad. So he's over there snoring, and I'm sitting there with my eyes wide open for 3 hours trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this information. Well, that's what I did with it. Because if you take all the shortage of raw material income times the interest that cost us over time, we almost clean up the economy perfectly. As a matter of fact, all we end up with is $2.5 trillion in gross public and private debt, Just enough credit for one annual production cycle. And VB came up with that in 10 minutes. Of course, it took us 10 days to do it. But there it is again, another shape, another form, same answer. Are y'all with me on that? Okay. I think I want to get into the Charles Ray moving mathematical constant. And let's put back up that utopian T-chart. And I'm going to pass over some of this stuff in here because I ad-libbed my way through it. Say it again. The utopian T-chart that projects the economy to the year 2010. Obviously, I'm getting into the rough part of this presentation because this stuff stretches me. And I'm supposed to be the expert here. If this was easy, any economist could do it. Okay, I'm going to read you a couple of pages and I'm going to see if it sets up the Charles Ray moving mathematical constant properly. This exercise of establishing the moving mathematical constant acknowledges technological advances. A growing economy is fluid, not static, and therefore it continuously creates very small and predictable changes in the percentages of annual national income attributable to each segment of the economy displayed on the left side of the T-chart. Only the left side. Doesn't mean that we change it from the profit side to the cost side just because we had technology advances. That's what we've done now. We've created a service economy and destroyed our manufacturing. Okay? But economists will tell you we've got a service economy and it's good. If it's good, why are the profits of private enterprise 14% of national income, below the depression level? Now I'm talking again, I'll be reading. I'll shut up and just read. All right. Specifically, as technology advances, the incomes of raw material producers, those engaged in agriculture, oil, gas production, mining, forestry, and commercial fishing are slightly reduced as a percentage of national income only. This makes room for the development, production, and sale of more high-tech items by manufacturers. This does not mean that a deterioration of profits should occur in the economy. It means that a constant, measurable movement of labor from those basic industries to manufacturing and selective essential services will occur as technology advances. These are appropriate changes in the division of labor. However, these changes should always maintain a consistent percentage of national income attributable to the left side of the T-chart, the profits of private enterprise. These advances in technology will very slowly release a larger percentage of the new, not existing, but new workers into non-basic industries. This natural progression is called an expanding trade and labor term. So, even though it appears that optimal ratios of income to cost are accurately restored by returning each segment of the economy to its respective percentage of national income earned during a base period of high profitability, 47-49, okay, nothing could be further from the truth. A restoration of these base period percentages of income to cost for every individual profit-producing segment of the economy will result in a giant leap backwards for our society because the improvements in overall technology since the most previous base period, 47-49, have allowed more jobs to be created outside the most basic of industries and more labor to be performed by people entering the workforce that are needed to produce and distribute more and more high-tech items. These are items that change the division of labor by assisting people in basic industries and basic manufacturing. Okay, now I'm going to get into examples. Did that set it up? How cloudy is it with y'all? Because this is a tough one. How many of you are with me? Just be blunt about it. How many are not with me anywhere in the room with me? Okay.
Well,
Stay with me. I think it'll come through.
let us paraphrase. You are going to have technological improvements.
Period. If you want to have a growing economy, it's
Okay.
going to happen.
Okay, and so the people that go into those sectors of the economy come out of your basic part of your
But
economy.
they stay on the profit side of they go from there into, they stay in the profits of private enterprise.
Because they have to be helping your basic production.
Exactly, exactly.
If they're not, then they're not really contributing to technological improvement.
Yeah, let me give some specific examples now on how this works in our day-to-day lives. Horsepower is the most simple of examples. 1 horsepower is the energy required to lift 550 pounds a distance of 1 foot in 1 second. More efficient horsepower is a technological advancement that alters the division of labor. When America farmed with horses and mules, a farmer needed to grow a certain amount of grain to feed the animals every year on his farm. Today, farmers plant and sell grain for cash or in the form of livestock, and the cash earned from these sales is used to pay production expenses that include the cost of mechanical horsepower and the cost of diesel fuel delivered to the farm. So the acreage formerly used to feed the draft animals now produces cash crops that pay for the refined fuel and more efficient horsepower that runs on rubber. These same systems get repeated with human labor. In the past, farm workers were assigned the job of hand weeding, hoeing. This was one of them. Today, synthetic chemicals and more sophisticated management procedures have replaced much of this hand labor. Another example of labor changes is the hand picking and pulling of cotton, of which I am intimately aware. Before mechanical cotton harvesters were invented, a strong man could be expected to pick 300 pounds of seed cotton per day. The same man, somebody argue with me on that number?
He's a good mother.
Huh?
He's a good hand if he can do that.
I knew 2 of those men. One of them was my grandpa. This same man could pull 500 pounds of cotton bollies, burrs, and all. So I can do that. The hardest worker, calculated separately, could only harvest a single bale of cotton in 4 days, maybe a week. Today, with mechanical harvesters, one man can harvest several bales of cotton per hour. But the labor didn't disappear, as many economists suggest. The labor simply moved to the city and became part of a more efficient mechanical harvester. The farmer paid the harvesting cost to the manufacturer, who employed hundreds of workers in town rather than hundreds of workers on the farm. The net efficiency gained through this process produces a reduction in the percentage of the farm portion of proprietors' income slightly over time. There is the Charles Ray moving mathematical constant. In our case, it reduced it from 7% of national income during the base period to 4.6% by the year 2010 if we decide to change the economy and run it correctly. The formula used to determine this change is called a mathematical moving constant and was perfected during the 1930s and 1940s by Charles Ray. Again, this does not mean we remove people from basic industries of agriculture, forestry, fishery, and mining and force them to town to produce high-tech items of commerce. It means that a larger percentage of the new annual workforce is channeled to high-tech jobs as the economy naturally expands over time. As a result of these changes, the raw material income of our economy at the first point of sale, that is the income from agriculture, forestry, commercial fishery, and mining, will gradually decrease as a percentage of national income and will only stop when society quits advancing. During periods of efficiency, during periods when efficiency does not improve and costs are increased faster than production income, there must be a conscious policy decision to maintain an absolute certain level of population of these basic industries, or much of the labor force assigned to basic industries by your society will be exploited or unemployed. Hello, do we know what's going on now? This can cause the eventual destruction of these basic industries, which will force imports onto the population. Hello again. This has already occurred in the petroleum industry. Since the income of these basic industries, agriculture, forestry, fishery, and mining, are produced at the beginning of each annual production cycle, the gross income paid to these industries automatically limits the prices those basic industries can pay for their production inputs at retail. Okay? That one should have hit home real hard. That is so fundamental. That might have been the most important thing I said all day. That one sentence. Say it again. Since the income of these basic industries, agriculture, forestry, fishery, and mining, is produced at the beginning of each production cycle, the gross income paid to these industries automatically limits the prices those basic industries can pay for their production inputs at retail. We're talking about how the standard of living in our society is generated. In turn, this income, the income paid for production inputs at retail, establishes a foundation under the price of skilled labor, which we showed is going down. These are the laborers that purchase the most expensive consumer goods in our society. We refer to this system in total as the production cycle. It's the circle of income for our citizens who produce, distribute, and consume our goods and services. Therefore, it becomes necessary to quantify the amount of gross income that should be earned by those producers at the first point of sale in order to maintain adequate price levels in the economy, and that's what we did with the raw material worksheet. Okay, so how are y'all with me on this one? Did that explain the Charles Ray thing? Did I do it right?
Right.
Did I nail it?
I think so.
Okay. Now, I'm pretty well through these charts. What's my time?
You've got all the time, half an hour.
Oh, God.
All day.
All right.
You did it right, but how are you going to sell that to our congressman?
That's your job. I'll do this part.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go through here and read a few passages that just keep supporting what I've got till now, and it's going to take most of the time remaining, maybe. But I think I've pretty well locked in the truth on this thing. Is everybody reconvinced like I am reconvinced from this research? Huh? Or have we landed on it? It's all still true, isn't it? Okay.
Fred, you might talk a little bit about the difficulty of finding these series and patching them up where the government is lying with their figures.
Well, what they did, the Department of Commerce, in its infinite wisdom, decided it would be responsible for no numbers prior to 1929. They just threw the numbers away. So I've got to go back into old statistical abstracts and the old notes and individual writings of Simon Kuznets and John Kirkland and some of those guys and piece it together. I'm having to get individual statistical abstracts from 1929 back to 1870 and reconstruct the data because they threw the numbers away. It's as if they didn't want to establish a pattern. You call the Department of Commerce and you ask them for numbers for 1928 and see what they say. We're not responsible for anything before 1929. Our NIPA book goes from 1929 through 1988, and that's just that. They refused to even acknowledge they had any unpublished data available. It's true. So anyway, I've been piecing it together by going to the Department of Labor and over the Bureau of Census. They got some stuff there. Of course, you can get statistical abstracts going all the way back. But the 5 segments of national income, which is the core of the base period formula, has been destroyed before 1929. And there's 3 or 4 concepts that have pieced it together, none of which are very compatible. But I found some good, solid decade-by-decade figures, which y'all saw this morning, that have the decade. But they diffuse the individual years and don't report them. So you can't pick out 10 to 14 and 25 to 29 anymore. But I'm going to reconstruct it, period. Yeah.
The oil industry, which is very well healed most of the time.
No, it's not.
It isn't.
It's a big promote.
Okay, then the connection that they have between the finance of the banking and the oil industry why wouldn't they run with something like this?
Well, when I talked to the guy at the American Petroleum Institute about the project, he was really interested. Their head economist. And he spent some time helping me develop the charts. I haven't got back to him. We met with the guy from Cinex, but not the Petroleum Institute. But these people are interested. The problem is the Petroleum Institute represents Exxon, Coke, Amoco, and they also represent people like the smallest stripper operators. So they're at a conflict within themselves. Who do they represent? The people who want the price cheaper to run everybody else out of business, or the people who need a parity price to support their local economies?
But wouldn't it be advantageous to them to look at the directorship that these people automatically should be interested in something like this?
And again, they are. They are. It's just, I mean, the data hadn't been ready. I mean, I'm going further with this thing this afternoon right now than I've ever gone before. This minute is furthest I've ever got into it. It really is. Let me keep reading through here. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what time frame it was that they got rid of their own data?
No, that would be interesting. I'm sure they'd tell me if I asked them. But it's ridiculous that they did that.
What you just pointed out here ought to prove to everybody that our government will do it to us. And it has done it to us.
Well, like I say, I played in Little League government for about 7 years, just enough to know how to go gather the data. And I'm just going to keep picking at it until I get it pieced back together. Okay, let me just keep reading some more of the stuff that supports what I've got so far. The logic of a prosperous raw material income group of industries creates an economic paradox to those who believe that more efficiency is always achieved by continuously maximizing the number of units produced at the least cost per unit of production without regard to the producer. Such logic ignores the necessity to maintain balanced price levels across the production cycle and is easily discounted because the trend lines flowing from this sort of efficiency finally end in total production at no cost. Sort of like the food replicators on the Starship Enterprise. You ever see Warp scream up a can of worms just by pushing a button? Okay, so absent a food replicator that creates food out of thin air, costing only the amortized cost of the device and the energy to power it, it becomes obvious that other factors, such as an equal exchange value between raw materials, factory goods, and wages, must always be considered as our urban society exchanges its labor and production with our rural society through each production cycle. Okay. Do what? Okay, I think I'm not sure enough about it. I think I'm just going to leave that labor turn out of there for the time being. Okay. No, as a matter of fact, just throw it up there. I'm not perfect about this one here. I'm not satisfied with it. This is the labor term that I've reestablished. And this labor term sets up the productive sector of our economy versus the rest of the population. That's the way I broke it up, and that's not the way that Wilkin broke it out or Charles Ray, either one, broke it out. See what? It takes the productive sectors of the economy, basically mining, agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and essential transportation. The people involved in that have ranged from 28 million people in 1941 to 32 million people in 1991. It's a pretty consistent number. And it relates that to the total population. So it's who is producing times how many people are out there to receive that production. When I did it any other way, it didn't work. But when I did it this way, all the numbers came back into line. Well, I'm not really convinced about that, and I'm not sure we ought to use it as that in that form. I see you're thinking about it, and I'm open to any comments on trying to reestablish the relationship between the labor dollars paid to people who are earning them. That's the labor ratio. All right, let me go forward with this. I'm going to try to read through something that will sort of support this here. Now let's discuss the trade turn and the parallel labor ratio, but more simply stated, the flow of dollars and the parallel flow of jobs through the production cycle. If you've got people, you've got to have money for them. If you've got jobs, they earn money. So you have a labor turn, a labor rollover, a percentage of people involved in certain areas that are getting paid a certain percentage of national income, in balance, hopefully, with a well-structured economy. By showing debt-free raw material income as a ratio to parity national income, or the combination of underpriced raw materials plus debt expansion as a ratio to national income, which is the current trade term, the parallel labor ratio, which is this chart, which is the numbers of workers that must be employed by those dollars as they are earned, we can prove the existence of a predictable, energy-based, moving mathematical constant ratio that flows as our economy progresses. So that means that this number right here, which is a ratio of workers, and I think this is going to bear out with more arithmetic, the percentage of workers engaged in production to the rest of the population is a ratio about 1 to 7 right now. That means that our overall ratio of dollars between those people and the rest of the economy should also be about 1 to 7. Only 40% of our of the people in America work. So it's very, very difficult for me to really analyze that properly, and I'm not through. I'm not even sure even want it up there yet. Are y'all tuned into what I'm trying to associate? Trying to associate the people with the money they earn and how those two flow side by side. Charles Ray did it.
But that
and he did it for 10 years.
Wasn't that before they come up with the social assistance that you have presently?
Excuse everything's bad. And I haven't gotten to the bottom of this. A lot of this stuff, like putting the debt expansion in with raw material income, you know, we've cut through that, those smoky mirrors. But we haven't done it when we get to the people. We cut through the dollars, the confusion of the dollars, but we hadn't cut through the confusion of what it does to people and what they do. But we're getting close, and I think we may or may not be on the right track with this particular attempt. This examination proves the existence of predictable ratios of raw material income at parity to parity national income, the theoretical debt-free trade turn, or an optimal energy usage, which must slowly increase at a rate sufficient to support an increasing population and a continuously increasing numbers of workers in the workforce. And that's as much as I need to say about that. Did that help at all? Okay. Are there any economists in the room? Did we have one that just walked out?
Correct. That refutes the argument that has been used against the raw material idea, that you don't need as much money for a bushel of corn as you get more efficient out there.
But you got to have people out there doing something, either building the mechanical harvester
So
or
that's
out on the
where
field putting the money into circulation.
that's where the so-called economists fall down, because they're on the productivity efficiency kick. Now, are you an economist by trade?
I don't even have a college education.
Were any of the people that you did research on this, Carl Wilkin, Charles Ray, were any of those economists?
No.
What does that tell you?
Okay. Okay.
See why these old one-horse town packers have that those people working in, they're always confused.
Okay, some of this stuff is going to bore you here, but I've got to get through it so we can pull some final points out of this thing. How much of this do you want to hear? I got 3 or 4.
All of it. We're not bored.
Okay. Okay. As history shows, the post-World War II period that was supposed to have a depression in store for us was only a figment of the misguided imaginations of confused and ill-informed economists who failed to recognize the importance of parity agricultural price structures that were established by the Congress in the early days of World War II. This parity law covered 2/3 of all raw material value. Now, excuse me for this is redundant to some of y'all from 50 years ago, but in this context, if somebody doesn't know any of this, it's all fresh news to them. So, economists of that period, World War II, failed to realize the importance of the raw material price policy that was already in place during that period, and the equity of exchange or structural balance it automatically created within the private enterprise system. The law that maintained the agricultural portion of raw material prices during that period was commonly referred to as the Stegall Amendment, or the Amendment to the Defense Act of 1941. This law resulted in ratios of production cost to production income that resulted in prosperity, even though we had a world war to fight and win, and most of Europe and Japan to rebuild. After the war, we still had prosperity. During those years, most economists were ignorant about the ability of raw materials to create new money. This is probably excusable because the formula that defined the relationship between raw material income and national income wasn't mathematically proven until the mid-1930s, when national income was found to increase and decrease in direct ratio to the increase or decrease of farm incomes part of national income. Sadly, our society lost 1/2 of its national income in this discovery and maintained that loss for over 10 years. This only happened when, this discovery of the relationship only happened when the sea of debt was eliminated from the economy by the stock market crash and the subsequent bankruptcies that followed, and the core production cycle finally surfaced completely intact underneath the debt. It was a terrible price to pay to find the natural order of our society. Did I do that right? This is the very first airing this has had outside of Jerome and I, kicking it back and forth. Today, economists should be held accountable for their arrogant and wrong-headed thinking. The raw material formula in both narrative and chart form, as well as the economic record during these base periods that test the formula, has simply been ignored. Instead, each institution of higher learning teaches its own form of confusion, not based upon science, not based upon physics, not based upon math, but based upon the subjective thesis of a tenured professor whose value system dissolves into bias when confronted by a lead pencil and a dime store pocket calculator. These same professors retire into right-wing think tanks that use business grants that were earned by businesses engaged in profits from debt expansion, and continually miseducate the Congress of the United States and future generations with their myopic idea of the economy. John Kenneth Galbraith punctuated these criticisms with the following remark: economists, when they seek to be profound, often only seek to be wrong. Okay, that's about as hard as I hit them, but they need it.
Fred, you might point out that the economic record of the United States proves from 1941 to 1946 we earned sufficient income to pay for World War II out of the savings that people saved and went and bought bonds and war bonds. We merely had to pass a law, tax away the increased income from the people that had it that couldn't spend it on goods and services that weren't available because they were going for the war effort. We could have paid for World War II. In fact, we did have the money to pay for it at the same time it was fought. Is that not correct?
There's a chart proves it. Our debt went down, and we were paying off debt, we were earning money, and the economy was flourishing during a period that should have brought an absolute depression. By all logical standards of current day economists. Okay, that's about as much as I want to dump on you. At the end of the book, what I have done is to take a look. I've read all these old so-called masters, from John Maynard Keynes back through Thorstein Veblen, all the way back to Adam Smith. And what I did at the rear of the book, I took their philosophy and looked at it through the eyes of our discipline. I read a lot of these guys back in the 70s when I was really trying to figure this out before I got acquainted with Norm. And so I went back and I've reread them in the last 2 or 3 years, and I've got some interesting analysis of these guys in composite form as it relates to us. And I don't know, I've got 4 or 5 of them here. Let me just let y'all, I'll tell you which ones I've got. I'd like to at least read one of them, and because all these guys deserve a hit. Okay, I've got one on Adam Smith and how our discipline applies to his philosophy. I've got one on Francis Cusney, which his is real close. He doesn't really deserve a hit. Thorsten Veblen, he was a real character. I got one on Frederick Soddy that was really close. Let me just read you the Soddy one, because that's not this isn't really a condemnation or a criticism, but it just shows that we're not the first ones to think about this issue. It's just about a half page. And I understand that Carl Wilkin wasn't aware of Soddy's work. Is that right, Chuck? It's this man here that brought Frederick Soddy's ideas into our current way that we believe raw material economics should be. So Carl Wilkin did all this without the knowledge of a Nobel Prize winner by the name of Frederick Soddy, which, by the way, worked on splitting the atom. That's why he got the Nobel Prize. The economists of the day just couldn't stand him. Frederick Soddy, born in 1877 and who died in 1956, was a British physicist who received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1921 for his work with Ernest Rutherford. Together they proved that radium breaks down by itself and gives off electrons and gamma rays, which are like X-rays. Soddy gave the name isotopes. That was his name, isotopes. He gave isotopes to atoms of the same element which had different weights. For that, he won the Nobel Prize. He was smart enough to do that. But when he got off into economics, which supports what we know to be true, he was condemned. He wrote several books, including Money versus Man, Wealth, Virtual Wealth, and Debt, and others. Soddy concluded that wealth takes on 3 forms, but only one is positive and tangible. According to Soddy, virtual wealth is the paper representation of tangible wealth, which is the stuff around us, which in the past we called either silver certificates, Federal Reserve notes, or something along that order. That's what he called virtual wealth. According to Soddy, these forms of scrip can only be considered IOUs, or a reflection of the community's debt to the holder. In other words, the amount of tangible value that the community owes the holder of that particular piece of paper that has an effigy of a ruler on it. He also concluded that if the nation issued all the money that it required of itself just as fast as it could be issued without increasing the price level, and that's just as fast as there were goods and essential services to consume and exchange, there would be an abundance of money instead of a scarcity, both to lend, borrow, spend, and invest, and to create prosperity. Soddy pointed to the fallacy of interest and debt in terms of physical laws. He considered interest as a double drain down against the wealth of a society. Soddy concluded that tangible wealth automatically creates its own form of interest that continually comes due, as other sectors of the economy must be paid for property maintenance. Costs money to fix your car, costs money to keep your house up, costs money to maintain your dwelling. Also, Soddy called the concept of capital debt impossible in the physical world because debt acknowledges the existence of a negative counterbalance to tangible wealth. But since tangible wealth can only be correctly represented in our economy as a currency, debt in the physical world has got to be impossible. He referred to interest in debt as the Midas pig. It's the funniest passage in Wealth, Virtual Wealth, and Debt. He called it the Midas pig. He observed that in nature, the least amount of pigs you can own is 0. So it becomes impossible for debt to represent a pig or any other form of tangible value. According to Soddy, a society creates debt only to cause income to be removed from the producers of tangible wealth. So anyway, that's how I analyzed through these old master And I'm tired. Why don't we just get into, I think I'm running. Yeah. Here y'all are. Here I am.
Fred, we thank you for sharing with us what you found all these many, many months. Those of you who are interested in SODI, we do have a few copies of Virtual Wealth and Debt at Acres USA. Ray over here has some Unforgiven books left over, and it's got a chapter in there on him called, I don't remember it, I think it was Energy or something like that. Because that's when I came to the party, when I was interviewing Carl Wilson, back about 1967 or something like that. At the end of one little segment, he says, it all has its origin in the laws of energy. And he was talking about economics, and that's when it clicked with me. I think with some of you it'll click this morning when he said, showed you the diagram, how impossible any kind of solution would be housed in the idea of foreign trade. You annihilated it. They can never rise from the dead. That wooden stake is through the heart. So why don't we take a little break here and we'll introduce our next speaker. Yes?
I would just like to say one thing. I hope everybody in this room fully appreciates what Fred has done in terms